The question is, do we buy or do we sell? Which one do we do first?
It would instantly have a huge effect in availability.
I think if they are looking to sell, it's looking to where to move to.
Do you know a boomer with a big house that they don't need? Or are you unsure about whether or not to downsize? Welcome to Real Talk, realestate.com.au's property news podcast. As the luckiest generation find themselves retiring or on the cusp of retirement, they've kind of reached this crossroads, struggling to make a decision about what their next chapter in life looks like. I spoke to a few agents and property industry folk earlier at the Ready24 conference about whether they think boomers are holding back the property market.
No way. If anything, we're actually creating more opportunities.
I do think that there's reluctancy.
There's probably a reason why they have to stay in their houses. They just don't want to move, and there's obviously tax implications when they do sell. But in terms of holding up stock, yes.
Joining me at our Ready24 conference to unpack it is Cameron Kusher, the Director of Economic Research at PropTrack, and Slater from Ingenia, one of Australia's leading over 50s community developers. I feel like I'm kind of having this conversation on loop with my own parents. They've already retired, but it is kind of, what does your next stage look like? Cam, can you paint a bit of a picture for us about the boomer generation in Australia? What do their ages look like? How many of them are there?
Anyone over the age of 60 to about 85 is considered a baby boomer, and there's about 6.5 million of them in Australia. Obviously, they went through the baby boom post World War II, and most of them are either retired or very close to being retired. Most of them have owned a property for many decades, and a lot of them have seen significant increase in the value of that property over those decades as well. And you could certainly argue that a lot of the gains they've seen in property prices have been very much unearned, and very little of them, unless they own investment properties, has been taxed as well. So they've got this huge boost to their wealth from holding property through a 30, 40-year period where prices only rose.
It's like they've ridden the coattails of the economy. Really?
That's pretty much it. And you know, we don't tax the principal place of residence. So, you know, that's all tax-free gains. And I know my parents, they've lived in their house for about 40 years, and they bought it for $30,000, I think, back in 1983. And it's probably worth a couple of million, if not more than that now.
Von, as one of Australia's biggest creators of over 50s communities, you must have some sort of insight into this generation. You know, what do you think defines the boomer generation?
We have over 4,500 homes that in our over 50s communities, and we've got another 5,900 to develop because as we noted, you know, there's a tsunami of baby boomers coming, and a lot of them haven't yet decided, you know, to downsize or right-size, as we probably should call it, into these communities. So, you know, when we research our customer and our homeowners that live with us, there's kind of three key things that encourage or, you know, motivate the boomers to move into the communities. And the first one's safety and security. And that's not so much about, you know, my car getting broken into out the front of my home, but it's about being part of a community where you feel safe, where you know your neighbours. You know, for a lot of these people that have lived in their house for 40 years, on bin night, you wave at the neighbours, you know their kids. But over the years, the demographic has changed around them. People have sold. There's new tenants with screaming kids, you know, guilty as charged, as well as, you know, the doof music of the renters out the back. And the community is just not the same anymore. So having that safety and security is a really big thing for them. The other part of it is actually just the community amenity that we offer. So, you know, you got independent homes gated with an amazing community facility in the middle. And that has anything from swimming pools, saunas, you know, billiards rooms, cinemas, and all of those things that amenity brings also brings that community spirit that they miss maybe in their neighbourhood that's changed. And then the final thing really is the financial, right? So a lot of them are rattling around in these homes that they've owned for 30, 40 years. You know, the kids have moved out. It's about, you know, right-sizing, downsizing to these communities and freeing up cash.
Cam, do we know where most of them live? Like, are we able to identify whether it is city or regional?
So if you look at the proportion of population over the age of 65 and the areas where most of them are, a lot of them are actually in coastal areas. So places like down in Shoalhaven in New South Wales.
So the most expensive.
The most expensive area. I mean, a lot of them have already shifted away from the capital cities to these areas. But I mean, if you're looking at capital cities, it's typically in the more affluent areas, you know, people that have come from old wealth or people that have bought into these areas when they were really run down and unpopular. And then over the last 40 years, they've gentrified massively, and the price of those homes have gone up and they've never wanted to leave because they've seen those capital gains. So it really is a mix of people that have already moved away to regional areas, coastal mainly, but also some inland areas, and then the more affluent areas of the capital cities.
Do we know what type of asset class they have?
Well, a lot of them are sitting in 4-bedders, some in 5-bedders. I mean, the thing about a lot of these properties as well is, if they were bought 30 or 40 years ago, it's probably not true to say that all of the value increases come just from the increase in the land price. A lot of them over those years have done major renovations to their properties. As their family has grown, they've added bedrooms, they've added bathrooms and things like that. So you're generally talking about large homes. And at the last census, there were 12 million spare bedrooms in the country.
That's outstanding.
We know that stat, and we know that a lot of that's actually being driven by people that are living in these really large homes and have not had the impetus or the encouragement to downsize into something more appropriate.
I really want you to kind of settle this generational debate. Was it easier for boomers to buy their house just back in the day?
100% yes. I mean,
yes.
obviously prices were a lot lower, and that's part of it. I mean, we always hear the stories about interest rates hitting 20% at the start of the 90s, but the thing that people don't talk about is they did go to 20% and then they fell for the next basically 15, 20 years. When interest rates were 20%, if you were saving for a deposit, your interest on your savings was about 15%. Now,
wow,
the low interest rate environment we've been in for the last couple of years, prices have risen a lot. Yes, it's cheaper to service a mortgage, but it's also harder to save for a mortgage because you're getting no return on your savings.
They're sitting in some pretty nicely priced property at the moment. What would it mean for the wider economic landscape should they sell these houses and free them up?
It'd be massive. I mean, there's a lot of people that are living, even though we've got a lot of spare bedrooms, there's a lot of people that are living in properties that just aren't right for them. They need to upgrade into something bigger. In some instances, even if these people in these large homes sold it to their families, then their families would be able to live in a more appropriate accommodation. So it's massive, but there's no real incentive to do that. When you consider how much property prices have risen, I think a lot of baby boomers look at it and go, well, the longer I hold on to this asset, the more it's going to appreciate in price. So the fact that the housing market has proven so resilient is probably also a key driver of them not wanting to sell that home.
Maybe also another key driver of them staying in their home, like let's just say they own their home outright. The costs of running that household now come down to kind of general maintenance, but also maybe they pay their rates every year and then on they jog.
And that's it. And I think the other big part, where do they go to? And if they don't want to move to the beach, if they want to stay in these suburbs, you think about the suburbs where a lot of this wealth is held, there's no medium or higher density options, or there's very few of them. So, and yes, they're the people that have opposed that development. But if you keep opposing new development in these areas, then when you do get to the point where you need to downsize, there's no option for you in that market.
Von, my next question is for you. Are you having conversations with boomers who are keen to sell their properties and downsize?
Yeah, we are. I mean, coming back after the break, our inquiries definitely spiked. And, for a lot of our customers, it can be overwhelming for them thinking about, is now the right time to downsize? Market really drives it. And these boomers have seen their, properties increase, astronomical levels, but, they're holding on to Betty up the road who sold her house, in peak during COVID for $10,000 more than what it might be worth now. And they're going, I'm just going to wait that little bit longer. So we're certainly talking to plenty of them that are ready, but also plenty that are kind of, pretty complacent and making every excuse why they shouldn't do it.
What are people saying are their hesitations?
People are overwhelmed. They're living in their house they've been in for 30, 40 years. None of the kids want the stamp collection they've accumulated, over that time. They've got all this stuff they need to move out. And sometimes it's just actually overwhelming thinking about how do I downsize this into a smaller house. In some instances for customers, there's so much choice and it's almost like paralysis analysis that, there's just so many things for them to think about, or what they're thinking about is complex, whether it's in retirement communities or, there's often, complexities around that. But I think the biggest barrier is complacency. It's easier to stay where I am. So I'm just not going to make the decision.
They are all, very valid reasons for not wanting to move. And when you put yourselves in their shoes and look at it from their perspective, you can see it. Von, Our research shows that it is normally some sort of major life event. So say medical or the death of a spouse, that's the trigger to move. Is that common with Ingenia communities?
Yeah, it is. We certainly see that. We're probably seeing more and more people maybe feeling a little bit more empowered. So perhaps, quite a few of the boomers have recently put their own parents into care, and their parents have gone into care when it hasn't been their choice. So there's a little bit of the boomers, going, well, I don't want that to happen to me. I want to be in control. So we're probably seeing a little bit of shift in attitude where the boomers are going, it's my choice, I'm going to make it for myself. Motivations for that. Sometimes it is the couple going, I want to move in before something happens to me, or I'm ill health and I want to know my partner is going to be in a community where they're supported when they move in. Financial reasons are growing. I think the boomers, off the back of all the money they're made on property, there are some out there that are being generous with their kids and helping them out. So, freeing up some equity from the family home to help the kids get into the market. So that's, generating people coming into our communities earlier. And we've seen the average age, of moving to these communities up in the 70s and now in the mid 60s. And that's kind of showing that trend to people going, all right, maybe I should do this earlier when I'm, empowered to do it.
When should people start thinking about downsizing?
In all choices, you want to have freedom to make the choice. You want to have the means to, where are you at in your life right now, and what decisions can you make that suit you today and for the future? And I think if you're empowered to make the decision, that's a really positive decision that you're making. If you leave it too late, the choice is gone and the outcome is out of your control. So I think, absolutely that's when you should be making that. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't be thinking about it 3-5 years before you need to as well.
Von, loneliness is a huge issue in our society right across the board. And especially as somebody gets older, I guess you have more time on your hands after you retire. And how do you see these over 50s communities solving that loneliness?
People have been part of a community and they've seen that change. And so they don't necessarily know their neighbours anymore, and that, take the casserole over and, those kind of things have disappeared from their day-to-day life in their suburbs. So coming into one of the Ingenia communities, it's almost like reliving that same community where, you know your neighbour, the people around you, you have that sense of security and place and belonging. The number of people that say to me when I'm in the community is that I feel so much younger since I've been here. They're learning new sports, they're learning new hobbies. And I always think about when I first started in this industry, the story of these 4 guys, and they'd moved into one of our communities and none of them wanted to move in. So the wives really wanted to move in and they were, I'm not doing it till finally, they gave in. So they were reluctant. They didn't want to be there. Now, these 4 guys didn't know each other. They'd never met before. And now they're best friends. So there's a workshop shed that the community can use. And these 4 guys, every morning, 9 o'clock, they're in the shed tinkering and they are best friends. And they'll sit there and they'll tell you, like, these are my 3 best friends. And before I moved here, I didn't know them. And I never thought I needed more friends. So it's these stories that I could, repeat so many of them. And that's what this community brings. And I think it's always important when you talk about these, retirement style communities that you don't have to be, Susie Social that's at every single function and event. You can be Harry the Hermit that just sticks to yourself, but you kind of know the people going around, but you can go around about your own life. So I think, it's how you want to live, but you've got the people around you.
What do you think are the perfect ingredients to creating a community?
I think to me, it's the way you do placemaking. So the way you think about the way people interact, whether it's in their own home and the way you lay the internal home out, but also the way that you encourage community to come together. So whether that's walking tracks with, stations to pause and, take a breath and, look around at the nature, or whether it's in the clubhouse where there's certain areas where people can come together. I think it's just about that, that placemaking and putting the human element into when we design and master plan communities.
A major barrier is the financial aspect and the lack of downsizing stock on the market. So what are the barriers here?
I think there's a few barriers. I think obviously we've talked about the mental hurdle of downsizing. For a lot of people, the house they live in is where their kids grew up. There is an emotional attachment to it. I think secondly, obviously getting prepared to downsize. If you're going into something smaller, you can't take everything that you've got in your bigger house. So you need to get rid of that. And then third, I think it's just actually getting the impetus to do it and the finances involved, because you're going to have to sell your house. You're going to have to move into a community or buy something smaller. You're going to have to pay stamp duty. If you've got investment properties, you might have to sell off those investment properties. There's capital gains tax that you're going to have to pay on those. So I just think for people as they get older and they've retired, it seems like a lot. It's not something easy to do. There's a lot of steps to get you to that point where you can actually downsize. And I think for a lot of people, they put it off because it is too hard.
Yeah.
But, going back to the point, it's better to do it when you have that choice. I mean, you never really have that choice. I mean, unfortunately, you could get sick and something could happen to you tomorrow. You never know when that's going to happen. So you'd certainly want to do that downsizing when you still have a decent quality of life, not when you have a horrible quality of life or you're forced to move into a nursing home or something like that.
What do you think is the solution? Like, what needs to change in your mind to make it more enticing? Is it something like incentives?
You've either got the stick or the carrot, right? The stick would be, we need to start looking at charging land tax. And I think that's a good way to go anyway. But if you've got this huge home that's too big for you and you're paying a massive amount of land tax on it every year, then there's a stick there.
Suddenly it becomes unappealing to live there. Yeah,
it does. Or there could be some incentives. I don't think politically giving wealthy property owners incentives to downsize is necessarily the answer when there's a lot of people out there that can't even break into the housing market. But I think just more awareness of that this isn't hard, that there's lots of people that have done it, more case studies out there about how, yes, it might seem really daunting, but it's actually not that daunting when you get in and do it, and you're going to have a better quality of life when you do. So maybe it is just more awareness of people that have successfully downsized.
I just want to pick up on taxes for a moment there, because tax settings obviously are different state to state. But what I'm interested in is, let's just say we have a couple in Victoria who want to move up to Queensland for their retirement. Just an example, how does it affect their overall downsizing experience? Because do those different tax settings in those states affect that?
There shouldn't be too much different if you're selling a property. Obviously, we know in Victoria at the moment, there's a higher tax for investors on properties. But in terms of stamp duty when you're purchasing, well, if you're moving from Victoria to Queensland, generally stamp duty is lower in other states outside of Victoria. If you're moving to Victoria, that stamp duty when you purchase is going to be higher. So that's certainly a consideration. But most people that are downsizing, I don't think stamp duty is really that big of a barrier at the end of the day. It's certainly a cost, and if you didn't have to incur it, you would prefer not to. But I don't think it's that massive hurdle that it is for someone like a first home buyer trying to get into the market, for example.
Apart from freeing up bigger homes, what other economic impacts would there be if boomers decided to sell?
Freeing up bigger homes is the big part of this, because you want a more mobile workforce. So, if more homes are available, then property prices may not rise as quickly. People might be more inclined to move to different parts of the city for a job, take a better job, move interstate or intrastate for a job. Obviously, if there's more homes available, then more people have got the ability to exit the rental market. And we know the rental market's extremely stressed at the moment and strained. So there's a huge amount of knock-on effects if we can get people right-sizing in property. A lot of younger people have way bigger houses than they need as well. So it's not necessarily exclusively a baby boomer thing to have more space than you need. But there's certainly people out there that don't have anywhere near enough space for what they need and how big their family is. So, there's a huge amount of benefit.
Von, what would you say to people who are thinking about downsizing, the ones who do find themselves in a house too big for their needs?
Now is the right time. Like, you're empowered, you've got choice, you've got so much of your life to live, your best years are still to come. Like, do it in a place that's, fits your means and fits your lifestyle, and, it's free up that housing market for the others that need it. And I think downsizing needs a rebrand. And I am not a marketing executive by any means, but you mentioned the word rightsizing. That's what it is.
Yeah, I like that.
Downsizing sounds so negative, but you're right-sizing, at different stages in your life, you need different dwellings, and, this is right-sized to what you need. So I think, do it as soon as possible and you won't regret it.
Yeah, and it is that a notion that I guess 30, 40 years ago, you bought a house with the intention of it being your forever home, and it's just not the case anymore. It's almost like what you just said, Bon. The different stages of your life require different dwellings. And I think I would love to speak to you guys for hours about this, but we're at time. So thank you both for joining me. I think probably everybody who will listen to this episode is about to go have a conversation with somebody who needs to right size.
Thanks, Alice.
Have the chat. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me. This has been Real Talk. For your weekly fix, please follow wherever you listen to your podcasts and tune in next time for more real questions, news and insights on the topics that matter most from realestate.com.au, Australia's #1 address in property. All information provided is general advice and opinion based on current market conditions. These opinions should not be treated as investment advice. Always obtain advice based on your individual circumstances.
Real Talk acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, air and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present.